Document. Part 1. The night was cold, darker than usual, because the moon had slipped behind thick clouds. The forest outside of Willow Creek, a small town in Montana, stood silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. It was the kind of quiet that made people uneasy, as though something unusual could happen at any moment, and then it did. A streak of light tore across the sky, brighter than any star or satellite. It moved fast, almost too fast to follow, leaving a fiery trail in its wake. For a few seconds, it lit up the entire horizon, casting eerie shadows on the trees below. Then came the sound, a deep, thunderous boom that shook the ground and startled animals out of their slumber. Moments later, the object disappeared behind the dense canopy of pines, followed by the unmistakable crash of metal hitting earth. Daniel Carter was driving home from a long day at work when he saw it. He'd been fixing cars all afternoon at the local garage, his hands greasy and his mind tired. The road back to his cabin wound through miles of empty countryside, and he often enjoyed the solitude. But tonight, the silence was broken by the sudden burst of light above him. At first, Daniel thought it might be a meteorite. He'd heard about them before, chunks of rock burning up in the atmosphere, sometimes leaving craters where they landed. But this didn't feel like just another space rock falling out of the sky. There was something different about the way it moved, almost as if it were alive. Curiosity tugged at him, pulling harder than his desire to get home and relax. He slowed down his old pickup truck and turned onto a narrow dirt path, leading toward the forest. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted tree trunks and patches of wild grass. His heart raced not from fear, but from excitement. He couldn't remember the last time anything interesting had happened in Willow Creek. Maybe this would finally break the monotony. After driving for several minutes, Daniel parked near a cluster of bushes and stepped out of the truck. The air smelled damp, filled with the earthy scent of pine needles and wet soil. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and began walking deeper into the woods, following the faint glow still lingering in the distance. It wasn't easy going. Branches snagged at his jacket, and roots threatened to trip him with every step. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and adrenaline. As he got closer, he noticed strange marks on the tree, scorch marks, blackened and jagged, as though something incredibly hot had grazed them. Whatever had crashed here wasn't natural. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel reached the source of the disturbance. A large clearing stretched out before him, its center dominated by the wreckage of what looked like, well, he wasn't sure what it was. It wasn't a plane, that much was certain. Its sleek, metallic surface gleamed faintly even in the dim light, and its shape was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Pieces of it were scattered around the area, some smoking, others eerily silent. But it wasn't the ship or whatever it was that caught Daniel's attention. It was the figure lying motionless near a stream a few yards away. Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. At first glance, the figure looked human. She was slender, dressed in a tattered silver suit that clung tightly to her body. Her hair, dark and matted, fanned out around her head like a halo. But there was something off about her. Something unnatural. Her skin shimmered faintly, catching the beam of his flashlight in a way that made it look almost liquid. And her eyes, when she stirred slightly and opened them, they weren't normal either. They glowed softly, a pale blue hue that seemed to pierce right through him. For a moment, Daniel considered running. This wasn't his problem. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, it wasn't safe to get involved. But then he saw the blood trickling down her temple, the way her body trembled as though fighting against exhaustion. She was hurt, vulnerable, against his better judgment. Daniel approached her slowly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her glowing eyes wide with confusion and fear. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, She tried to sit up, only to collapse back onto the ground with a soft groan. "You're safe now," Daniel murmured, crouching beside her. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Then, carefully, he slid one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, lifting her gently off the ground. She weighed almost nothing, her body surprisingly light despite her height. As he carried her back toward his truck, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far bigger than himself. Who or what was she? Where had she come from? And why had she ended up here, alone, in the middle of nowhere? Questions swirled in his mind, but he pushed them aside for now. One thing was clear: she needed help. Whether she was human or something else entirely, she was lost and alone, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, Daniel felt responsible for her. Back at the truck, he laid her carefully on the passenger seat and draped his jacket over her trembling form. He climbed into the driver's side and started the engine, glancing over at her once more before pulling away. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow but steady. "You're safe with me now," he repeated quietly, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. Somehow, saying the words aloud made him feel better, as though they carried a promise he intended to keep. The drive back to his cabin felt longer than usual, each mile stretching endlessly as Daniel wrestled with his thoughts. What had he gotten himself into? Was helping her the right decision? Or was he putting himself and possibly everyone else in danger? By the time he pulled into his driveway, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the horizon. Exhaustion weighed heavily on Daniel's shoulders, but he knew he couldn't rest yet. Not until he figured out exactly who or what he had brought home with him. Carefully, he carried her inside and laid her on the couch in his living room. Her shimmering skin caught the early morning light streaming through the windows, making her look ethereal, almost unreal. Despite everything, Daniel couldn't help but feel a pang of awe. Whoever or whatever she was extraordinary. He covered her with a blanket and sat down in a nearby chair, watching her intently. For the first time in years, Daniel felt truly alive. The world outside his cabin might have been ordinary, predictable even, but inside, things were about to change, in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Document Part 3. The forest was quiet when Daniel arrived at the crash site. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. He parked his truck a short distance away, careful not to leave tire tracks that might draw attention. As he walked toward the wreckage, he scanned the area for any signs of disturbance. So far, it looked untouched. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing to suggest anyone else had been there. Relief washed over him, but it was fleeting. Daniel knew it wouldn't stay this way for long. People in Willow Creek weren't used to strange occurrences like this. A streak of light tearing across the sky and disappearing into the woods. That kind of thing would get tongues wagging. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to investigate. He approached the remains of the alien ship cautiously. Up close, it looked even stranger than it had the night before. Its metallic surface shimmered faintly, almost as if it were alive. Pieces of it lay scattered around the clearing, some bent and twisted, others reduced to fragments. Daniel knelt beside one of the larger chunks, running his fingers over its smooth, cool surface. It didn't feel like any metal he'd ever encountered. Too light, too perfect. As he examined the debris, he noticed something unusual. Embedded in the side of the ship's hull was a symbol, etched into the material with precision. It resembled a circle surrounded by intricate patterns, almost like writing but too complex to decipher. Daniel frowned, wondering what it meant. Was it a warning, a name, or something else entirely? He snapped a photo of the symbol with his phone, thinking it might be useful later. Then he stood and surveyed the area again. There was no denying how extraordinary this was. This wasn't just a random object falling out of the sky. It was advanced technology, far beyond anything humans could create. And yet, here it was, lying in pieces in the middle of a Montana forest. Daniel felt a pang of guilt as he thought about Lyra. She had trusted him enough to let her guard down, to share bits of her story despite her fear and pain. But now, standing amidst the ruins of her world, he couldn't help but wonder what she truly was. Was she dangerous? Could her presence put others at risk? These questions gnawed at him, but deep down, he knew he couldn't turn away from her, not after seeing the vulnerability in her glowing eyes, before leaving. Daniel gathered a few smaller pieces of the wreckage and stuffed them into a backpack he'd brought along. If anyone came looking, having evidence might give him some leverage or, at least buy him time to figure out what to do next. With one last glance at the clearing, he turned and headed back to his truck. When Daniel returned to the cabin, he found Lyra sitting by the window, staring out at the trees. She turned as he entered, her expression brightening slightly at the sight of him. "You're back," she said softly. "Yeah," Daniel replied, setting the backpack down on the table. "Everything's still intact out there, but we need to be careful. Someone's bound to notice sooner or later." Lyra nodded solemnly. "I understand. I don't want to cause trouble for you." "You're not causing trouble," Daniel said quickly, though part of him wondered if that was true. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" She gave him a small, grateful smile, and Daniel felt a flicker of warmth, despite the weight of their situation. He pulled out one of the pieces of wreckage he'd collected and held it up for her to see. "Do you recognize this? Can you tell me what it is?" Lyra studied the fragment carefully, her brow furrowing. After a moment, she pointed to the symbol etched into its surface. "This? It's part of our language. A marker. It tells others where we come from." "Where you come from?" Daniel asked, intrigued. "Can you read it?" Lyra hesitated, then shook her head. "Not all of it. Only certain parts. My people, we use many symbols. Each one means something different." Daniel nodded, tucking the fragment back into the bag. "Well, maybe we can learn more later. For now, we should focus on keeping you safe." Lyra's gaze dropped to her hands, which rested nervously in her lap. "I'm afraid, Daniel. Afraid of what will happen if others find me." "I won't let that happen," Daniel assured her firmly. "But we need to prepare. Do you have anything that could help us communicate with your people? Any way to contact them?" Lyra's eyes lit up briefly, and she stood, moving toward the couch where she'd left her silver suit. From a hidden pocket, she pulled out a small device, no bigger than a deck of cards. It hummed faintly, emitting a soft blue glow. It's damaged," she explained, holding it out for Daniel to see. "But maybe it can still work. Maybe I can fix it." Daniel took the device gingerly, marveling at its sleek design and smooth surface. It felt warm in his hand, almost as if it were alive. "What does it do?" "It sends signals," Lyra replied. "If my people are nearby, they might hear it. But it needs energy. Without power, it cannot function." "Energy," Daniel echoed, frowning. "Like electricity?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, something to make it wake up." An idea sparked in Daniel's mind. He remembered an old solar charger he kept in the garage for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to provide the device with some power. "Wait here," he said, heading outside to retrieve it. When he returned, Lyra was examining the device closely, her fingers tracing its edges with delicate care. She looked up as Daniel placed the solar charger on the table. "Will this work?" he asked. Lyra studied the charger for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It might. We must try." Together, they connected the device to the charger, positioning it near the window, where sunlight streamed in. Almost immediately, the device began to glow brighter, its hum growing louder. Lyra's face lit up with hope, and Daniel felt a surge of optimism. Maybe this could lead to something, a way to get her home, to end whatever danger she feared. But as the hours passed, the device's glow dimmed again, and the hum faded into silence. Lyra sighed, disappointment etched across her features. It's not enough, she murmured. The damage is too great. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, we'll find another way. You've got time. Time, however, was a luxury they might not have. By late afternoon, the peace of the cabin was shattered by the distant sound of voices. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. He moved to the window and peeked outside, careful not to be seen. 2 men were walking along the edge of the property, their heads tilted upward, as if searching for something. Who are they? Lyra whispered, standing close behind him. I don't know, Daniel admitted, his voice low. But they're probably looking for the crash site. Word must have spread about the lights last night. What should we do? Lyra asked, her voice trembling. Stay quiet, Daniel instructed, and stay out of sight. If they come closer, go to the bedroom and lock the door. Don't come out until I say so. Lyra nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. She retreated to the bedroom, as Daniel had instructed, closing the door softly behind her. Meanwhile, Daniel grabbed a wrench from the kitchen counter and stepped outside, determined to intercept the intruders before they reached the cabin. The 2 men spotted him almost immediately. One of them raised a hand in greeting, while the other squinted suspiciously. Hey there, the first man called. You live around here? Yeah, Daniel replied, forcing a casual tone. What's going on? We heard about some kind of explosion last night, the second man said, his voice gruff. People are saying it came down somewhere near here. Any idea what it was? Daniel shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. No clue. Could have been a meteorite or something. Didn't see anything unusual myself. The men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. Mind if we take a look around? The first man asked. Just to be sure. Sure, Daniel said, stepping aside to let them pass. He followed closely behind, keeping an eye on their movements. They wandered around the yard for a few minutes, peering into bushes and kicking at the dirt. When they didn't find anything, they seemed to lose interest. Guess it wasn't here, the second man muttered. Let's check further up the road. Once they were gone, Daniel exhaled sharply, relief flooding through him. He waited a few moments to ensure they weren't coming back, then hurried inside. Lyra emerged from the bedroom, her expression tense. Are they gone? For now, Daniel replied. But they'll keep looking. We need to be smarter about this. Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting both gratitude and determination. Thank you, Daniel, for protecting me. You don't have to thank me, Daniel said softly. I promised I'd keep you safe, and I mean it. As the day drew to a close, Daniel and Lyra sat together in the living room, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. They were strangers bound by circumstance, thrown together by forces neither fully understood. Yet in that moment, surrounded by uncertainty, they shared a quiet bond, one built on trust, courage, and the unspoken promise to face whatever came next, together. Document. Part 4. The next morning. Daniel woke up early, the events of the previous day replaying in his mind. He had barely slept, his thoughts consumed by Lyra's safety and the growing risk of discovery. The 2 men who had come snooping around weren't just random passersby. They were a sign that word about the crash was spreading faster than he'd anticipated. It wouldn't be long before more people started showing up, asking questions, and poking around. He glanced at the couch where Lyra had spent the night. She was still asleep, her chest rising and falling gently beneath the blanket. Her shimmering skin caught the soft morning light streaming through the windows, making her look almost otherworldly. Daniel felt a pang of guilt as he watched her. She seemed so peaceful now, but he knew she carried a heavy burden, grief for her lost crewmates, fear of being found, and uncertainty about her future. Quietly, he got up and made his way to the kitchen. He needed coffee, something to clear his head and help him focus. As the machine sputtered to life, filling the room with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Daniel leaned against the counter and stared out the window. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the cabin, its dense trees hiding secrets that no one in Willow Creek could have imagined. Somewhere out there was the wreckage of Lyra's ship, a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode their fragile peace. When the coffee was ready, Daniel poured himself a cup and sat down at the table. He pulled out the small device Lyra had shown him the day before and examined it closely. It was sleek and smooth, unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its faint blue glow had dimmed since they'd tried charging it with the solar panel, but it still hummed softly, as if alive. Daniel wondered what kind of technology could create something like this. Was it possible for humans to replicate it? Or was it far beyond their reach? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind him. He turned to see Lyra standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Good morning," she said, her voice hesitant. "Morning," Daniel replied with a smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Thank you for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Daniel said again, gesturing for her to sit. "Here, I'll make you some tea or something. Do you drink tea?" Lyra nodded slowly, taking a seat at the table. "Yes, tea is fine." As Daniel prepared the tea, Lyra studied the device in front of her. She reached out tentatively, running her fingers over its surface. "It needs more energy," she murmured. "Without it, I cannot contact my people." "I know," Daniel said, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "We'll figure something out. Maybe we can find a better power source." Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with gratitude. "You're doing so much for me. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to repay me," Daniel said firmly. "Just stay safe. That's all I care about." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the sunlight dance across the wooden floor. Eventually, Lyra spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "Daniel, I need to tell you more about why I'm here, about my mission." Daniel set his mug down, giving her his full attention. "Okay? Tell me." Lyra took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "My people, we are explorers. We travel to different worlds, studying them, learning about their ecosystems, their cultures. Earth, your world, it is special. It has life, diversity, beauty. But it also has problems: pollution, wars, destruction. My mission was to assess whether Earth could support peaceful coexistence with my people." "Coexistence," Daniel echoed, surprised. "You mean like living together?" "Yes," Lyra said, nodding. "Some of my leaders believe Earth could benefit from our knowledge, our technology, but others, they see only resources to exploit. They want to take what they can and leave nothing behind." Daniel frowned, processing her words. "So, you're caught in the middle of this fight?" "In a way," Lyra admitted. "I was sent to gather information, to prove that Earth deserves protection, not exploitation. But now," her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her hands. "Now, I am stranded. If my signal cannot reach my people, I fear the wrong voices will win." Daniel's heart sank. He hadn't realized the stakes were so high. This wasn't just about keeping Lyra hidden, it was about protecting an entire planet. "What happens if they decide to exploit Earth?" he asked cautiously. "It would be catastrophic," Lyra said bluntly. "Your world would change forever. Resources would vanish, environments would collapse. Your people, they might resist, but they would not stand a chance against us." The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He had always thought of aliens as creatures from science fiction stories, distant and unreal. But sitting here with Lyra, hearing her speak with such conviction, he couldn't deny the truth. Humanity was vulnerable, and the fate of their world might rest in her hands and his. "We can't let that happen," Daniel said, finally, his voice firm. If there's any way I can help you complete your mission, I will. Lyra looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. You would do that, even knowing the risks? Yes, Daniel replied without hesitation. I may not understand everything about your world, but I know enough about mine. Earth doesn't deserve to be destroyed. Lyra smiled faintly, a mix of hope and sadness in her expression. Thank you, Daniel. You give me strength. For the rest of the morning, they worked together to brainstorm ideas. Lyra explained that her device needed a specific type of energy, one that was stable and consistent. Solar power wasn't enough. But Daniel had another idea. What about a generator? He suggested. I've got an old one in the garage. It's not perfect, but it might work. Lyra's eyes lit up. That could help. Let's try. Together, they dragged the generator inside and connected it to the device. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the blue glow began to brighten, and the hum grew louder. Lyra's face lit up with excitement. It's working, she exclaimed. But their joy was short-lived. After a few minutes, the generator sputtered and died, unable to sustain the energy demand. The device's glow dimmed once more, leaving them back where they started. It's not enough, Lyra said, frustration creeping into her voice. The generator is too weak. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. There has to be another way, something stronger. Lyra nodded, her determination unwavering. We'll keep trying. We must. Later that afternoon, Daniel decided to venture into town to gather supplies. He needed food, fuel for the generator, and anything else that might help them. More importantly, he wanted to gauge the mood in Willow Creek. Were people still talking about the crash? Had anyone discovered the wreckage yet? As he drove through the quiet streets, he noticed groups of people gathered outside the local diner and gas station, chatting animatedly. A few cars were parked near the edge of town, their owners seemingly preparing for a trip into the woods. Daniel's stomach tightened. Word was definitely spreading. He stopped at the grocery store and hurriedly loaded up on essentials, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize him. When he reached the checkout line, he overheard a conversation between two women ahead of him. Did you hear about that spaceship everyone's talking about? One of them asked, her voice tinged with excitement. A spaceship? The other replied skeptically. Don't be ridiculous. Probably just some weather balloon or something. No, I'm serious. The first woman insisted. People saw it crash last night. They're saying it's aliens. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He paid for his items quickly and left the store, his mind racing. The rumors were escalating, and soon curiosity would turn into action. People would start searching the woods in earnest, and it wouldn't take long for them to find the wreckage or, worse, Lyra. Back at the cabin, he found Lyra pacing nervously. What's wrong? She asked as soon as he walked in. They're talking about you, Daniel said grimly. About the crash. People are getting curious. Some of them are planning to search the woods. Lyra's face paled, and she wrapped her arms around herself protectively. What do? We stay one step ahead of them, Daniel replied. We need to move the wreckage, hide it somewhere safer. And we need to keep you out of sight. But how? Lyra asked, her voice trembling. I can't just disappear. You won't have to, Daniel assured her. We'll figure it out. Together. Over the next hour, they devised a plan. Daniel would return to the crash site under the cover of darkness and scatter the debris deeper into the forest, making it harder to find. Meanwhile, Lyra would remain hidden in the cabin, using the time to continue repairing her device. As night fell, Daniel grabbed a flashlight and headed back to the woods. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. He moved quickly, collecting pieces of the wreckage and dragging them further away from the clearing. Each fragment was heavier than it looked, and by the time he finished, his muscles ached and his clothes were soaked with sweat. When he returned to the cabin, Lyra was waiting for him, her expression anxious. Did anyone see you? No, Daniel replied, collapsing onto a chair. But I don't think we have much time. Tomorrow, there'll be more people out there. Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. Then we must act fast. Daniel looked at her, admiration swelling in his chest. Despite everything she had been through, the loss of her crew, the crash, the ISO. Document, Part 2. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Daniel's cabin, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. The air was still cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from outside. Daniel sat in his chair, staring at the figure lying on his couch. She hadn't moved since he brought her inside hours ago. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing steady but shallow. He wasn't sure if she was asleep or unconscious, but either way, she seemed fragile. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What had happened to her ship? And most importantly, why did she look so different? Her skin shimmered softly, even in the dim light, and her closed eyelids glowed faintly, as though lit from within. It was beautiful, yes, but also unsettling. He couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely human. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 7 in the morning. If he didn't leave soon, people might start wondering where he was. Daniel worked at the garage in town, and while his boss wasn't strict, showing up late without an explanation would raise eyebrows. But how could he leave her here alone? What if she woke up scared, or worse, what if someone came looking for her? His stomach churned with indecision. Finally, he stood and walked over to the kitchen counter, pulling out his phone. He dialed the number for the garage and waited anxiously as it rang. "Hey, Rick," he said when his boss answered. "Listen, I'm not feeling great today. Think I caught a bug or something. Can I take the day off?" There was a pause on the other end before Rick replied gruffly, "Yeah, sure. Just don't make a habit of it." "I won't," Daniel promised, hanging up quickly. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Now that he had the day to himself, he needed to figure out what to do next. He returned to the living room and knelt beside the couch. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was an underlying tension in the way her hands were clenched into fists. Daniel reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of dark hair away from her forehead. Her skin was warm to the touch, though not uncomfortably so. It felt smooth, almost like silk. As he pulled his hand back, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they just stared at each other, her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, wide with confusion and fear. Daniel froze, unsure of what to say or do. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up into a sitting position, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. "It's okay," Daniel said gently, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here." She blinked at him, her expression softening slightly. After a moment, she opened her mouth and spoke, her voice low and melodic but hesitant. "Where am I?" Her words were broken, accented, but understandable. Daniel exhaled sharply, surprised that she could speak at all. "You're in my cabin," he replied. "I found you last night near the crash site." Her brow furrowed, and she looked around the room, taking in the rustic furniture and simple decorations. "Crash site," she repeated, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. "Your ship had crashed in the forest. Do you remember anything about that?" She closed her eyes briefly, as if searching for memories buried deep within her mind. When she opened them again, they were filled with sadness. "My crew," she whispered. "They're gone." Daniel's heart sank. He hadn't considered the possibility that others might have been with her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't see anyone else out there." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her luminous eyes. "I am alone." The pain in her voice was palpable, and Daniel felt a surge of empathy. Whoever she was, wherever she came from, she was clearly grieving. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. Instead, he gestured toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? Thirsty? I can get you something. She hesitated, then nodded weakly. Water, please. Daniel hurried to the kitchen and poured a glass of water from the tap. As he handed it to her, their fingers brushed briefly, and she flinched, pulling back instinctively. He apologized immediately, stepping away to give her space. She drank the water slowly, her movements deliberate and careful. When she finished, she looked up at him, studying his face intently. Who are you? She asked. My name is Daniel, he replied. Daniel Carter. And you? She hesitated again, as though debating whether to trust him. Finally, she said, Lyra. Lyra, Daniel repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It suited her somehow, soft, yet strong, like the glow in her eyes. That's a nice name. Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if puzzled by his comment. Nice. It means good, kind, Daniel explained with a small smile. Like pleasant understanding dawned on her face, and she gave a tiny nod. Thank you. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of unanswered questions hanging between them. Daniel decided to break the tension. Can you tell me where you're from, Lyra? How did you end up here? Lyra frowned, her gaze dropping to her lap. Far, far away, she murmured. A place unlike this. Outer space. Daniel ventured cautiously. She looked at him sharply, surprise flickering in her eyes. You believe? Well, it's hard not to, Daniel admitted, with a nervous chuckle. You don't exactly look like you're from around here. Lyra's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, and Daniel felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Making her smile even, just a little, felt like progress. My people. Explorers, she continued after a moment. We came to study your world, to learn, understand, and your ship malfunctioned. Daniel guessed. She nodded solemnly. Yes, something went wrong. We tried, but her voice trailed off, and she lowered her head. Overcome with emotion, Daniel reached out tentatively, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Lyra. That must have been terrifying. She looked up at him, her glowing eyes meeting his once more. There was gratitude in her expression, mixed with something else, hope. Perhaps you helped me. Of course, Daniel replied without hesitation. I'll do whatever I can. For the first time since he'd found her, Lyra seemed to relax. She leaned back against the couch, exhaling deeply. Thank you, Daniel. He smiled warmly, though unease lingered in the back of his mind. Helping her was one thing, but keeping her presence hidden was another challenge altogether. Sooner or later, someone would notice the wreckage in the forest. Questions would be asked, and if word got out about Lyra, Daniel shook his head, pushing those thoughts aside for now. One step at a time, he told himself. First, he needed to make sure she was okay. Everything else could wait. Over the next hour, Daniel introduced Lyra to basic human comforts. He showed her how to use the faucet, explaining that running water was common in homes. He offered her food, a slice of bread and some cheese, but she declined, saying her body required different sustenance. Instead, she asked for more water, which Daniel gladly provided. As they talked, Lyra began to pick up on English more quickly than Daniel expected. Her sentences grew clearer, her accent less pronounced. She explained that her species had the ability to absorb languages rapidly, a skill honed through centuries of exploration. Daniel marveled at this, impressed by her intelligence and adaptability. Despite her growing confidence, Lyra remained cautious. She flinched at sudden noises and avoided direct eye contact for too long. Daniel understood that she was traumatized, both physically and emotionally. He resolved to be patient, giving her time to heal. By midday, Lyra appeared stronger, though still visibly weary. Daniel suggested she rest while he checked on the wreckage in the forest, ensuring no one had discovered it yet. She agreed reluctantly, insisting that she didn't want to burden him, but Daniel reassured her. promising to return as soon as possible. Before leaving, he made sure she knew how to lock the door and hide if necessary. Just in case, he said firmly. Stay safe, okay? Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting both gratitude and concern. Be careful, Daniel. With that, Daniel stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. The sunlight warmed his skin as he climbed into his truck, but his thoughts remained heavy. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Keeping Lyra safe would require sacrifice, secrecy, and courage. But as he drove toward the forest, one thought kept him going. She trusted him, and for Daniel, that meant everything. Document. Part 5. The days that followed were tense and exhausting for Daniel and Lyra. Every morning, they woke up with a sense of urgency, knowing that time was slipping away. The whispers in Willow Creek had grown louder, spreading like wildfire through the small town. People were no longer just curious, they were determined to find answers. Groups of hunters, hikers, and even amateur treasure seekers began venturing into the woods. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and vague hopes of discovering something extraordinary, Neil felt the pressure mounting. He spent most of his time either hiding evidence or keeping an eye on the growing number of intruders near the crash site. Each trip into the forest left him more drained than the last. He scattered the remaining pieces of wreckage deeper into the wilderness, burying some under piles of leaves and dragging others into thickets where they were unlikely to be found. But no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Sooner or later, someone would stumble upon what he'd missed. Back at the cabin, Lyra focused all her energy on repairing her communication device. She sat at the kitchen table for hours each day, carefully examining its intricate components and testing different methods to restore its power. Daniel brought her tools from the garage: pliers, screwdrivers, wires, and watched as she worked with precision and patience. Her hands moved deftly, her glowing eyes fixed intently on the task before her. Despite her calm demeanor, Daniel could see the frustration building in her every time the device failed to respond. It's not working, Lyra muttered one afternoon, setting down the tiny tool she'd been using. I've tried everything I can think of. You're doing great, Daniel said encouragingly, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. We'll find a way. Just give it more time. Lyra sighed, leaning back in her chair. Time is something we don't have much of. Her voice carried a note of despair that made Daniel's chest tighten. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but he knew it wouldn't mean anything unless he could back it up with action. Instead, he offered a small smile and said, "Let's take a break. You need to rest." She nodded reluctantly, allowing him to lead her outside onto the porch. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows across the yard. They sat side by side on the wooden steps, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. For a moment, the weight of their situation seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet peace. "Tell me about your world," Daniel said, after a while. "What's it like?" Lyra hesitated, as if unsure where to begin. Then, slowly, she started speaking. "It's beautiful. There are vast oceans that shimmer like glass, mountains that glow under two suns, and forests filled with trees that sing when the wind touches them." Her voice softened, taking on a wistful tone. "My people live in harmony with our environment. We value knowledge, exploration, and connection with each other and with the universe." "It sounds amazing," Daniel said sincerely. "I wish I could see it." Lyra turned to look at him, her glowing eyes reflecting both gratitude and sadness. "Maybe someday you will, if we succeed." They fell silent again, the warmth of the sun wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Daniel realized how much he enjoyed these moments with Lyra, not because they offered a distraction from their troubles, but because they reminded him of why he was fighting so hard. She wasn't just an alien stranded on Earth. She was a person with dreams, fears, and a mission she believed in deeply. Helping her felt like the right thing to do, even if it meant risking everything. Later that evening, as darkness settled over the cabin, a knock at the door shattered the calm. Daniel froze, his heart pounding. No one ever visited him unannounced, especially not this late. He glanced at Lyra, who had retreated to the bedroom the moment she heard the sound. Her wide, frightened eyes met his briefly before she closed the door behind her. Taking a deep breath, Daniel approached the front door cautiously. He peered through the peephole and saw a woman standing on the porch. She was tall and slender, dressed in a crisp blazer and jeans, with a notebook tucked under one arm. Her sharp features and confident posture gave her an air of authority. "Who is it?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice steady. "My name is Rachel Hayes," the woman replied. "I'm a journalist. I'm writing a story about the recent sightings in the area, and I was hoping you might have some information." Daniel's stomach churned. A journalist? This was exactly what he didn't need right now. He considered ignoring her, pretending he wasn't home, but he knew she wouldn't leave without getting answers. Reluctantly, he opened the door just wide enough to block her view of the inside. "What kind of information are you looking for?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Rachel smiled politely, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. "People say they saw strange lights in the sky a few nights ago. Some claim it was a meteorite, others think it might be something extraterrestrial. Have you seen anything unusual lately?" "Nope," Daniel lied smoothly. "Haven't noticed a thing." Rachel tilted her head slightly, clearly skeptical. "Really? Because I heard you were out in the woods recently. Someone mentioned seeing your truck near the edge of the forest." Daniel cursed inwardly. Of course someone had noticed. Small towns like Willow Creek thrived on gossip, and nothing stayed secret for long. He forced a laugh, hoping to play it off as harmless curiosity. "Yeah, I went for a drive. Thought I'd check out the commotion, same as everyone else. Didn't find anything interesting though." Rachel studied him closely, her gaze penetrating. "You seem awfully calm for someone living so close to all the excitement." "I'm just minding my own business," Daniel said firmly. "Look, I don't know anything about whatever you're chasing. Maybe you should talk to someone else." For a moment, Rachel looked like she might argue. Then she nodded, stepping back from the door. "All right, I'll leave you alone for now. But if you remember anything, give me a call." She handed him a business card before turning and walking back to her car, as soon as she drove away. Daniel closed the door and locked it, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. Lyra emerged from the bedroom, her expression tense. "Who was that?" "A reporter," Daniel replied grimly. "She's sniffing around, asking questions about the crash." Lyra's face paled. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Daniel assured her. "But she's suspicious. She knows I've been in the woods." "This is bad," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "If she keeps digging, she'll find us." "We'll deal with it," Daniel said, though uncertainty lingered in his mind. "For now, stay out of sight. Don't come outside unless absolutely necessary." Over the next few days, Rachel became a constant presence in Willow Creek. She interviewed locals, snapped photos of the forest, and posted updates online about her investigation. Rumors swirled faster than ever, fueled by her articles and social media posts. Some claimed aliens had landed in Montana, while others dismissed the whole thing as a hoax. Either way, interest in the crash site reached fever pitch. Daniel avoided Rachel as best he could, sticking to his routine of hiding evidence and checking on Lyra, but it was getting harder to stay ahead of the crowd. More people ventured into the woods each day, their numbers growing larger and bolder. One group even set up camp near the edge of the forest, determined to uncover the truth. Desperation began to creep into their efforts. Lyra worked tirelessly on her device, experimenting with new ways to generate power. Daniel scavenged parts from old electronics and brought them to her, hoping something would spark a breakthrough. Together, they tested batteries, solar panels, and even a car alternator. But nothing provided the stable energy source the device required. One night, as they sat together in the dim light of the cabin, Lyra finally broke the silence. "There's another option," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, looking at her curiously. "There's a place nearby, a power station. It's abandoned, but it still has equipment that might work. If we can get there, I might be able to use it to charge the device." Daniel frowned, considering the risks. An abandoned power station sounded dangerous, especially at night, and if anyone saw them, it could raise even more questions. Still, they were running out of options. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll go, but we have to be careful." The journey to the power station was nerve-wracking. They traveled in Daniel's truck, taking back roads to avoid detection. The station itself was eerie, its broken windows and crumbling walls giving it an ominous appearance. Inside, the air smelled of rust and decay, and the floor was littered with debris. Lyra moved quickly, her glowing eyes scanning the room, until she found what she was looking for, a large generator tucked in the corner. With Daniel's help, she connected it to her device and flipped the switch. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the device began to hum, its blue glow brightening steadily. "It's working," Lyra exclaimed, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. Daniel smiled, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in days. "Does this mean you can contact your people?" "Not yet," Lyra admitted, "but it's a start. With more time, I might be able to send a signal strong enough for them to hear." As they packed up and prepared to leave, Daniel couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism. They were still far from safe, but they had taken a crucial step forward, for the first time since. Document Part 6, The Abandoned Power Station, had given them a glimmer of hope, but it wasn't enough to erase the looming threats outside. By the time Daniel and Lyra returned to the cabin, the world around them felt smaller, more suffocating. Rachel Hayes' presence in Willow Creek was becoming harder to ignore. Her articles and posts were everywhere on social media, local news websites, even flyers pinned to bulletin boards around town. She had painted the crash as a mystery waiting to be solved, and her persistence was drawing attention like moths to a flame. Daniel knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. Every trip into the woods, every interaction with outsiders, carried the risk of exposing Lyra. He tried to keep his movements discreet, sticking to remote paths and avoiding main roads whenever possible. But paranoia crept into his mind, whispering doubts about whether he'd already been seen or followed. Was someone watching him right now? Had Rachel figured out that he knew more than he let on? Lyra sensed his unease. She spent most of her time indoors, pacing quietly or working on her device. The generator from the power station had provided a temporary boost, but it wasn't a permanent solution. The energy drained quickly, forcing her to ration its use. Still, she refused to give up. Each night, she tinkered with the device, adjusting wires and testing connections, her glowing eyes reflecting both frustration and determination. One evening, as they sat together in the dimly lit cabin, Daniel broke the silence. "We need a plan," he said, his voice low but firm. "If Rachel keeps pushing, people are going to start searching harder. We can't just keep running." Lyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you suggest?" "We distract them," Daniel replied. "Lead them away from the crash site, away from here. If we can make them think the wreckage is somewhere else, maybe they'll stop looking so close to home." "How?" Lyra asked, tilting her head slightly. Daniel leaned forward, his mind racing. "I'll plant false clues. Leave behind pieces of metal or debris, farther out in the woods. Make it look like the ship broke apart over a wider area. Maybe even spread rumors that I heard something near the river or the old quarry." "It could work," Lyra admitted, though uncertainty lingered in her voice. "But what if they catch you?" "They won't," Daniel said confidently. "I've lived here my whole life. I know these woods better than anyone. Trust me." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, but promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Daniel assured her, offering a small smile. The next morning, Daniel set out early, armed with scraps of metal and plastic he'd salvaged from the crash site. He drove his truck to a spot miles away from the cabin, deep in the forest, where few people ventured. Carefully, he scattered the debris along a narrow trail, making sure it looked natural like remnants of a violent impact. He even scratched markings into nearby trees, mimicking the scorch patterns he'd seen near the real wreckage. As he worked, he kept an eye out for anyone who might stumble upon him. The woods were eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of a bird. For a while, he allowed himself to believe that no one was watching, that his plan might actually succeed. But just as he finished planting the last piece of debris, he heard voices approaching. His heart skipped a beat. Quickly, he ducked behind a thick tree, holding his breath as two men emerged from the underbrush. They were dressed in rugged outdoor gear, carrying backpacks and cameras slung over their shoulders. One of them held a map, pointing excitedly at something marked in red ink. Over there, the man with the map said, gesturing toward the trail where Daniel had left the fake evidence. Look at those burn marks. This has to be it. The second man nodded eagerly, snapping photos as they moved closer. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to intervene. He forced himself to stay hidden, knowing that revealing himself would only complicate things further. Once the men were out of sight, Daniel exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. His diversion had worked, at least for now. He slipped back to his truck and drove home, his mind replaying the encounter. The men hadn't seen him, but their discovery meant the search was spreading. He needed to act fast. Back at the cabin, Lyra greeted him with a mixture of relief and concern. Did anyone see you? No, Daniel replied, shaking his head. But I ran into some treasure hunters. They found the trail I made. It should keep them busy for a while. Lyra nodded, though worry still clouded her features. And Rachel, what about her? She's the bigger problem, Daniel admitted. She's smart, persistent. If she keeps digging, she'll figure out I'm hiding something. Then, we need to deal with her, Lyra said firmly, before she finds us. Daniel frowned, considering her words. How she's not going to stop writing about this. And if we confront her directly, it'll just make her more suspicious. Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing in thought. Maybe we don't have to confront her. Maybe we convince her. Convince her of what? Daniel asked, confused. That she's wrong, Lyra explained. That there's nothing extraordinary about the crash. That it's just junk. Space debris, like everyone else thinks. Daniel raised an eyebrow, skeptical. You think she'll buy that? It's worth a try, Lyra insisted. If we give her a story she can't resist, she might leave us alone. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, let's say we do this. How do we pull it off without blowing our cover? We feed her misinformation, Lyra replied. Tell her the crash site is somewhere far away, somewhere dangerous, hard to reach. Make her focus her efforts elsewhere. It was risky, but Daniel couldn't deny it had potential. Fine, I'll handle it. But if this goes sideways, it won't, Lyra interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. We'll be careful. Together. Later that day, Daniel drove into town, keeping a safe distance from Rachel's car. As he parked near the diner, he spotted her sitting at a table by the window, typing furiously on her laptop. Taking a deep breath, he approached her cautiously, stopping just short of her table. Rachel, he said, trying to sound casual. Got a minute? Rachel looked up, surprised to see him. Daniel, what brings you here? I've been thinking about what you said the other night, Daniel began, leaning against the wall. About the crash, Rachel replied, her interest piqued. Did you remember something? Maybe, Daniel said, shrugging. I didn't want to say anything earlier because I wasn't sure, but I think I saw something weird. Up near the mountains. The mountains, Rachel echoed, raising an eyebrow. That's a long way from where most people are searching. Yeah, well, I wasn't exactly planning to go hiking, Daniel said with a nervous laugh, but I did notice some strange scrap metal lying around. Looked like it had been burned or melted, and there were these weird symbols carved into the rocks. Rachel's eyes lit up, and she grabbed her notebook. Symbols? What kind of symbols? I don't know, Daniel lied, scratching the back of his neck. They were jagged, geometric, like nothing I've ever seen before. Could have been part of the ship or whatever it was. This is incredible, Rachel murmured, scribbling notes furiously. Do you think you could show me where you found it? Not a chance, Daniel said quickly, shaking his head. It's too dangerous. Loose rocks, steep cliffs. I barely made it out alive. Rachel frowned, clearly disappointed. Are you sure? If this is real, it could be huge. I'm sure, Daniel replied firmly. But hey, if you're brave enough to check it out, good luck. Just don't blame me if you get lost. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Rachel staring after him, her mind buzzing with possibilities. As soon as he was out of sight, he let out a shaky breath, hoping his bluff had worked. Back at the cabin, Lyra listened intently as Daniel recounted the conversation. When he finished, she smiled faintly. You did well, for now, Daniel said, sinking into a chair. But she's not going to let this go easily. We need to stay one step ahead. Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting both gratitude and resolve. We will, as long as we stick together. And for the first time in days, Daniel allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Their situation was far from perfect, but they had momentum and each other. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side.